All animals and humans have worms that live inside of them, that live off of them, and we call those parasites. And they come in all various sizes, but they all look alike. They all kind of look just like what you think of a worm as. For the past 50 years or so, parasites have been controlled mainly with chemical drugs. Prior to that, there was all sorts of various homemade remedies, even nicotine and tobacco were used. Many of the things that were used were very toxic to the animals, and sometimes the treatment was worse than the parasite itself. But now, control of parasites is almost totally reliant on chemical dewormers. Due to simple natural selection, parasites become resistant to the drugs that we use to try to kill them. And this is going to be true for any organism, whether it's bacteria, and people are very familiar with antibiotic resistance. It's also true for parasites. And after years and years of controlling parasites with drugs, the worms have developed resistance to those drugs, and in some cases resistance to all the drugs that we have available to us. Each animal has different types of parasites. Some are more damaging than others. In sheep and goats, the main parasite problem we have is called Haemonchus, or the barber pole worm, and this is a very pathogenic parasite. It can cause a very severe illness and even death very frequently. And so on farms where the drug's no longer working against Haemonchus, it's not uncommon to have animals dying even right after treatment. All animals aren't infected with parasites equally. We've known this for years, but we ignored it for a long time, and we felt that the best way is just to treat all the animals. Every time some animals need to be treated, you treat all of them. We now realize that that was not a very good recommendation, and so the recommendation has changed, and this is true worldwide. So now what we recommend is you try your best to identify those animals in the herd or flock that need to be treated, and you just treat those animals, and you don't treat the animals that really don't need to be treated. One of the problems that we have in implementing this targeted selective treatment approach, where we only treat the animals that need to be treated, is having an efficient means of identifying those animals from the rest of the herd. And it can be difficult in many cases. However, in horses, one thing we can do is we can take fecal samples and do parasite worm egg counts on those feces, and we can determine how many worm eggs are in the feces of every different horse, and figure out which horses are more infected and which horses are less infected. In cattle or sheep or goats, that becomes an expensive and difficult process because working the animals becomes more difficult to collect that sample. However, since the barber pole worm is a blood-sucking worm, a veterinarian in South Africa got the idea that we could measure indirectly the level of parasitism by looking at the mucous membranes of the eyes and determining or estimating the level of anemia in those animals. And so he developed this system that's called FAMACHA, and it's really an eloquent system. They produce these cards that have images of the eye with colors. And so it goes from red to red pink to pink white to almost white, which goes from non-anemic to extremely anemic. It made it very easy. All farmers have to do is examine the eyes of the animals, and they can determine which animals are becoming anemic and which ones aren't. And then they can apply treatment just to the ones that are anemic or are starting to lean towards becoming anemic. Horses have the same problems that we see in sheep and goats. In fact, sheep and goats have the biggest problem with drug-resistant parasites. Horses have the second biggest problem. Luckily for horses and for horse owners and the whole horse industry, that the parasites in horses just are much less damaging to the horse than the parasites of sheep and goats are to them. Most horse owners have this great fear of parasites in their horses, so they're deworming their horses all the time, and that gives them a sense of relief that they're doing the right thing and their horses are healthy because they're deworming them. The reality is that there's a huge and a very widespread problem with drug resistance in horse parasites. And a lot of those treatments that are being given to horses simply don't do anything for the benefit of the horse. And the reason why their horses are staying healthy is because the parasites themselves are not very damaging to the horse. And many horses have very good immunity to parasites. And so there's just not many parasites there to cause any problems in the first place. And so what we recommend for horses is, instead of deworming frequently like most people do, we recommend that there be some worm egg count surveillance done, where about twice a year all of the horses have a fecal egg count performed, and then we can determine which horses have the low egg counts, which ones have the high egg counts, and And we can concentrate our treatments on the horses that are constantly having the high egg counts, because it's a very repeatable trait of a given horse. And so what we want to do with livestock is avoid high levels of parasites that are going to cause disease, but we really don't care if they're infected with low level of parasites, because that's really a natural state for them, and it really doesn't affect their health negatively. It's different with dogs and heartworms, because even a few heartworms in a dog can cause severe disease. And so in dogs, really our goal is to have all dogs have absolutely no heartworms at all. And so it's a very different approach and philosophy in terms of how we go about controlling those two different types of parasites and those two different types of animals. And so in dogs, we need to treat basically every dog throughout the year to prevent them from getting infected with heartworms in the first place. Any dog living in most of the United States that's not on heartworm prevention is at significant risk, particularly along the eastern coast, the southern United States, and anywhere along the Mississippi. Those are the really the hottest areas for transmission. But heartworms are transmitted in every state in the continental United States. There are some indications that resistance might be developing in heartworms. Right now, the scientific community is split over whether there really is resistance. The data is limited at this point in time. What we do have is a situation where we know that there are failures of prophylaxis, meaning that animals, that dogs that are taking their monthly heartworm treatments are getting infected with heartworms. It seems to be a U.S. problem, and it seems to be localized into the Mississippi Delta area of the U.S. There's no indication of these failures of efficacy anywhere else in the world. One of the important things now is that people continue to give their dogs their heartworm medication every month. Some people saying, well, if it doesn't work, why should I spend all that money? Well, it does work. I mean, in 99.9% of all cases where people are given these drugs, they're working 100%. And it's really, these problems seem to be really localized to the Delta area. So it's really critical that people continue to give their dogs heartworm medication every month, all year long.